Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. It's your host, Danny Haifong, for another live stream. And as you can see, I am joined by two very special guests, dear friends of the show who have been on this program dozens of times in the last several years. We have Scott Ritter, former U.S. Marine Corps Intel officer and UN weapons inspector, and Professor Mohammed Marandi at the University of Tehran, geopolitical analyst and commentator. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Of course. So let's get started now. Everybody hit the like button as you come on the program. You can find both Scott's new book as well as Professor Mohammed Marandi's X in the video description. Hit the like button to boost this stream. And we are going to get started now with how we got to the precipice of war between the United States and Iran. I wanted to actually pull up what Donald Trump said just in the last day or so about this when he was asked by the press, would the U.S. take military action if talks fail with Iran? This is what he had to say.
But with Iran, if it requires military, we're going to have military. Israel will obviously be very much involved in that. He'll be the leader of that. But nobody leads us. We do what we want to do.
So how about we start with you, Professor Marandi? Talk to us about your take on how we got to this point where the Trump administration in the United States is threatening military action and war on Iran should talks over its nuclear program fail.
I don't think it's surprising to anyone. Trump is that sort of person. He murdered General Soleimani, who led the fight against ISIS and Al-Qaeda or Al-Qaeda in Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon. And if it wasn't for him, probably the very same people who helped the United States create ISIS and Al-Qaeda, like Mr. Erdogan and the leaders in Qatar and Saudi Arabia, they would probably be gone. King Abdullah or Abdullah of Jordan, ISIS and Al-Qaeda were an American creation, product of Operation Timber Sycamore. And the Americans brought in tens of thousands of foreign fighters to Syria, and then they spread to Iraq and Lebanon as well. General Soleimani led the fight against these criminal organizations, and Trump murdered him. So when Trump murders General Soleimani, then I think you can expect him to do anything. The Iranians, of course, responded, but and he said that he will, if Iran strikes back, that the United States will hammer Iran. He didn't, fortunately, but when you have that sort of history, then I think nothing is unexpected. We already see what's happened in the stock market. His foolishness has led to a huge damage to the U.S. economy, to the global economy, but the U.S. economy probably more than anyone else, except for very poor countries. But he backed down. He blinked first yesterday. He's not predictable. He's not well advised. He does not have a sense of morality. He imposed a ceasefire and presented himself for a few days or a couple of weeks in Gaza as a man of peace, and then he green-lighted the genocide again. And right before we came on air, I tweeted a very particularly painful video of people being slaughtered in Gaza. And then he began to kill the people of Yemen, our friends. I wanted to go to Yemen for the conference that Pepe Escobar participated in, but unfortunately the Jordanians won't let Iranians go through. But we know what Pepe has said about Yemen, that the Americans are targeting civilian infrastructure. They're targeting water resources used for civilians. The Trump regime is no different from Netanyahu. So why not? Why should we expect anything other than threats made towards Iran?
Oh, sorry, I was muted. Scott, your take.
Well, I'm going to take a different approach here to point out that we're here because of Iran's nuclear program. And that doesn't mean that Iran's guilty of anything. Because when I speak of Iran's nuclear program, I speak of a program that is permitted under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, of which Iran is a signatory. It's a program that actually has its roots in the former government of Iran during the time of the Shah, where the Bushehr reactor was originally conceived. I think Siemens, a German company, was supposed to be the one providing the construction assistance. And in the aftermath of the Iranian Revolution, when the Islamic Republic took over, they indicated they wanted to continue this, that the underlying analysis that was done by the Iranians for the need for peaceful nuclear energy was a legitimate one, that Iran was an oil-producing nation that was increasing its own internal consumption of energy that would detract from its ability to export oil, which reduced income. So this was purely a legitimate economic purpose behind its its program. But it was denied the ability to do this by the United States and by Europe, who, in violation of their obligations under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, even though Iran was in compliance with the totality of its commitments, we denied Iran access to the technologies it would need. Iran was faced with a choice. Do we give up our nuclear ambitions, understanding there's legitimacy behind it, that would mean that Iran would be hamstringing itself from an energy security perspective, from an economic perspective? Or does Iran pursue, using the means available to it to acquire the technology to solve these problems itself? And Iran chose to turn to the black market because that was the only option to it. I'm not being condemning of Iran. I'm stating reality. When all legitimate options are shut off, Iran went to the black market to get the requirements or get the technology necessary to meet the requirements that were necessitated by bringing Bushehr up to power. Which means when the world denies Iran access to not only reactor technology but the fuel, that means Iran needs to capture the nuclear enrichment cycle, the nuclear fuel cycle. It's not illegal. Article 4 of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty permits this. And that's what Iran did. The problem came that Iran didn't declare some of these activities. Obviously, we know why, because to declare it invites it to be sanctioned, and then Iran ends up shooting itself in the foot. And then, so what happened is the Israelis, working together with Iranian opposition, the Mujahideen al-Khalq, carried out a series of high-profile briefings, and I think it was 2002, that brought some of the Iranian efforts to light, greatly exaggerated certain aspects of it, tried to turn it into a weapons program. But this brought the attention of the world. And now the IAEA, together with other nations, had to turn to this issue. And I'm not going to get into the specifics. This was a very difficult situation for Iran. Mistakes were made in terms of initial declarations and things, but eventually Iran told the truth, because the truth is they didn't have a nuclear weapons program. The truth is they were pursuing a legitimate, peaceful nuclear energy program. But the problem is the United States, because we are loyal allies of Israel, we took the Israeli position, which was not one spinning centrifuge, meaning that Iran wouldn't be allowed to have any enrichment capacity, no matter what, even though Iran is allowed to have this under Article 4. And this began a series of confrontations between Iran and the IAEA at the behest of the United States. I mean, the United States was pushing these confrontations. Israel and the United States flooded the market with false intelligence. I mean, again, I don't want to get into too much detail, but I think Professor Marandi knows full well. Intelligence that appeared in 2004 was fabricated, demonstrably so. only to reemerge again in 2009, repackaged as falsified intelligence, only to reemerge in 2018 as falsified intelligence. Each time Israel tried to sell the same bad information to try and paint Iran as a rogue nation pursuing nuclear weapons. Iran has done a remarkable job in fending off these provocations. And the Iranian negotiating team, and I know Professor Marandi was part of it, deserves nothing but the highest praise for getting Iran to the point where there was the ability to have an Iran nuclear deal. The Iran nuclear deal didn't come because Iran needed it, though. It became because the United States needed it. The United States had backed itself into a rhetorical corner by labeling Iran as this nuclear threat worthy of military intervention, and then being befuddled by Iran continuing to stand its ground, rightfully so, on its right to have a nuclear enrichment program. The Obama administration had a choice to either go to war with Iran or compromise. And the Obama administration chose compromise. We stepped back from a policy that said not one spinning centrifuge, and instead entered into an agreement that gave Iran the ability to have the enrichment program that the law said it could have, and the enrichment program that it was seeking to have. And this is what the JCPOA did. But in many ways, the JCPOA was a trap. And it was a two-way trap, because it was an incomplete negotiation and it was a dishonest negotiation, not from the Iranian perspective, but from the American perspective. Because the United States trapped Iran by creating the concept of a nuclear threshold state, meaning that what the JCPOA did is create the notion that Iran had to be denied the ability to produce a nuclear weapon, so they created a one-year breakout window, meaning the concept of we need to create a situation where Iran, if it decided to walk away from the agreement, it would take 1 year for Iran to acquire sufficient fissile material to produce a single nuclear bomb. And so from a global perspective, they created a new concept. It's one it's not in the NPT, not at all. It's not in Iran safeguard agreements. It's not contained anywhere but in the JCPOA. The concept of a nuclear threshold power being one that is, if it exists, represents an existential threat to the security of the world. I'm not saying it is. I'm talking about perceptions, and perceptions create their own realities. Now, the Obama administration was never going to implement the JCPOA. Professor Marandi, you know this. Iran knew this, because in July is when it was signed. In April, Obama gave a presentation to NPR where he said, yeah, we got them contained up front. And they said, well, what about the sunset clauses? What about the expiration of certain restrictions that once they expire, allow Iran to accumulate more enriched material, to deploy more advanced centrifuges as part of a peaceful nuclear program? And Obama said, no, that's never going to happen. If we get to the point where the sunset clauses are going down and Iran hasn't retreated from its desire to have a nuclear program. You see, Obama wasn't saying Iran could have one. Obama's saying we're buying time for Iran to realize that they don't want to have one. But if Iran never realizes that, then Obama said that we will reconsider everything, which means it was never a real agreement. It was a fake agreement from the very start. Iran negotiated in good faith, and I'm not condemning Iran for anything. And I hope, Professor Marandi, you're not taking anything I'm saying as criticism of Iran. The criticism is purely with the United States and how we approach this. But what I want to start off with is that the JCPOA was a fundamentally fatally flawed agreement that was never going to survive. And I've looked at the Iranian negotiation record, and I looked at the Iranian internal debates, and Iran knew this. They knew this. This is why Iran, and one of the most brilliant, I know Mr. Zarif is coming under a lot of criticism nowadays, and I understand why. But I will say this. The United States was trying to put Iran into a negotiation trap in 2014, 2015 about snapback sanctions. And it was a whole trap that if Iran failed to comply with its obligations, then the other party would be able to snap back, to renege on its commitments regarding the lifting of sanctions and everything. And a lot of people were surprised when Iran went along with this. But I remember reading the Iranian in the parliament, the negotiations that take. Zarif was put on fire there, and he responded and talked about it. The sword cuts two ways, which Iran proved, because Iran wasn't going to be the one in noncompliance. Iran knew that the United States would be the one in noncompliance. And when Donald Trump did what Iran expected Donald Trump to do, and again, I want to say, why did this take Iran by surprise? It wasn't a treaty. It was an agreement. The Republican senators before, I think in April, sent a letter to the Supreme Leader saying, we're going to walk away from this thing. Don't expect this to stand. The next president comes in, we're out of here. And they tried to lecture him on the Constitution, and it was a very insulting letter. But the Iranians should not have been taken by surprise when Donald Trump came in and did exactly what they promised he would do, walk away from the agreement. But the Iranians were prepared. That's why they negotiated in. I think it's, I could be wrong, Article 24, Article 36, something like that. But basically allows Iran, if the United States withdrew, Europe was in noncompliance with its obligations under economic relationships, under threat of American secondary sanctions. So Iran started to walk away from its obligations as the agreement allowed it to do. Again, Iran has done nothing wrong here. I'm laying out the facts, but here's the problem. As Iran walks away from its obligations, and again, legally so, doing what they're permitted to do, they are falling into a situation where the opponents of Iran can now label them as a nuclear threshold power. And this is the trap that I don't think Iran understood and maybe doesn't understand today. I'm not being critical. Maybe the Iranians understand everything. But from my perspective, Iran has walked into a trap where it has allowed itself to be labeled by America and Israel, who started this whole problem. So it's not a just label. It's a label, though, that says Iran is a nuclear threshold power. And this goes beyond simply rhetorical when Iran has accumulated certain capabilities, all legal, allowed under the NPT, 60% enrichment, Iran is allowed to have it. Advanced centrifuges, Iran, did everything it was required to do in backing away the declarations, but they have put in cascades. I think it's IR6, the IR6 centrifuge, very high efficiency. They might even have some IR8s out there, high efficiency centrifuges that greatly reduce the time frame necessary to step up enrichment. And when this happens, and then you also create bomb-proof nuclear facilities like Firdos, which are underground, can't be hit with conventional weapons. People are saying that Iran has positioned itself to become a breakout nuclear power, which is what the JCPOA was supposed and designed to prevent. And this is what Trump and Israel are exploiting today, the perception that Iran is a breakout nuclear power. And this perception is furthered when you have, for the past year, senior Iranian officials making statements to the effect that in a very short period of time, if a political decision was made to terminate the fatwa, which prohibits nuclear weapons, that Iran has all of the capability that they could develop a nuclear weapons capability within days or weeks. And this is the situation we find ourselves in.
Scott, I want to get it back to Professor Marandi in a second, though. Do you have, is that all right?
The reason why I'm going into this detail, Danny, is because there's a whole bunch of people. I'm not reading your comment section, but there's a whole bunch of ignorant people out there who put words in my mouth and don't understand the depth of knowledge and understanding I have of this problem. I've been following this problem from the very beginning. And I'm not saying that I am as knowledgeable as Professor Marandi, but I'm not lacking in knowledge or insight into this problem. So when we are talking about the present, you cannot divorce the present from the past. And when we speak of Donald Trump's, what's driving Donald Trump's policy position here, it's not something that was invented yesterday. It's something that has a long history, an in-depth history behind it. And I think it's imperative that people understand that while I'm not saying that the president's reasoning is legitimate, I'm saying it exists. And that's the difference. By saying it exists, by acknowledging the reality of Donald Trump's position, I'm saying this is real and it's something that must be addressed. It can't simply be dismissed as Donald Trump is an insane man, a crazy man, etc., because the consequences of not respecting the fact that he has this position, the consequences could be devastating to Iran, to the region, to the United States. And my goal and objective is to avoid a conflict, not to further the possibility of a conflict.
Yes, yes, of course, of course. Well, we have plenty of time, Scott, to get into all of this. But first, Amar, I want to kick it to you. Anything there that you wanted to respond to for what Scott was saying? You know, there's some points there about Iranian officials over the last period talking about being able to build a nuclear weapon in rapid time, and several others. So I want you to respond to any of those.
Yes, I would agree with almost everything that Scott said. I'll also add some background, and then I'll give a small explanation about where my view differs, and that is about the Iranians knowing what they're doing. I think they know exactly what they're doing, but I'll get there. I just want the audience to have a better understanding of the situation. As Scott pointed out, the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, has an obligation to cooperate with countries to build up their peaceful nuclear program. And Western countries, which dominate the International Atomic Energy Agency, prevented Iran from doing so. The rest of the world, remember, back then, Russia was weaker than today. China was weaker today. The United States was the hyperpower. The Soviet Union had collapsed. And Europe and the United States were very close. And they were basically in charge. And so they were in clear violation. Iran had already invested a lot of money in the nuclear program, too much money, actually, because the Shah, instead of building schools, half the girls in the country were still uneducated, more than half, almost half of the boys uneducated. But we were buying F-14s, and he was building like this infrastructure for the nuclear program, which a lot of it wasn't necessary. But the Bushehr program was half finished, and then the Germans left and they refused to return. So Iran had invested, spent a lot of money in this, and the government, the Islamic Republic of Iran, the administration at the time, they believed that that money shouldn't go to waste. And it's not just the money; it's the many thousands of young people who went to university, who studied in these areas, whose lives and future depended on the nuclear program. So the United States and the Europeans violated international law. The International Atomic Energy Agency violated its own rules and regulations and prevented Iran from building its peaceful nuclear program. And so Iran had to do what it had to do, and it went in the black market and purchased what it needed, and it began to do R&D as well, and gradually it began to develop a nuclear program, which today is probably one of the top most advanced nuclear programs in the world. And as Scott said, Iran is basically a threshold state, like Japan, like South Korea, like Brazil, I think. And of course, that is not a violation of international law, as Scott pointed out. Now, the reason why Iran began to increase the percentage of enrichment to 20% first, and this was years ago. That was because Iran, the Americans were preventing Iran from getting fuel for its experimental reactor in Tehran, which produces medical isotopes for cancer patients and other patients. And so the Iranians said, we're going to produce enriched uranium at 20% and then make fuel rods for the reactor. And that, of course, was a problem with the United States and the West. But Iran was also using this as leverage, which I'll get to later. Later on, as Scott alluded to, Iran, in one of his tweets, Iran began producing enriched uranium at 60%. Now, when did this happen? This was after the nuclear deal was signed. And I was on Piers Morgan's show last night, probably a mistake, because he promised me, I mean, his people promised that it wouldn't be a circus. They wanted to bring two really ridiculous people on. And I said only one, and they agreed. And then they brought both on. And the whole time, these two people were ranting and raving, and they were saying I'm a hostage and that I'm not allowed to talk. And if I say anything that I don't like, they'll shoot me. And Pierce was basically saying, well, you know, there are these criticisms. So, but interestingly, in Iran, the nuclear deal that was signed by Dr. Zarif, as Scott pointed out, there was huge debate in the country. And I was one of the critics of the negotiating tactics of the administration at that time. I wasn't with the opposition, and I didn't express my criticisms in public, but I did tell Dr. Zarif that I don't think that the United States is going to implement this. The United States sees itself as above the law. And I do think that Dr. Zarif and the people around him thought that the United States would behave better than it did. But in any case, what I'm trying to say is that debate in Iran is very fierce. It's much more fierce than in the United States, actually. Maybe not in public TV. Public TV is not really a place for debate, but on online Telegram channels and on the internet, on campus, students, come up to me and ask me all sorts of questions. They criticize the government. They criticize the leader. All you have to do is get into a taxi or go into the underground or get on a bus, and you'll see that politics in Iran is a big thing. Like in Arab countries, they talk about foreign issues. In Turkey, increasingly, they talk about foreign issues. But in Iran, they talk about the leader, the president, the government, the former president, and whatever. So there was a fierce debate, as Scott pointed out. And the United States did not abide by its commitments. And this is a very important point that Scott raised. This didn't begin with Trump, it began with Obama. And by the way, the brutal and illegal maximum pressure sanctions did not begin with Trump, they began with Obama. Trump was angry that Obama signed a deal and he was going to decrease, not remove, decrease some of the sanctions, which Obama didn't do. So Iran complied it complied with its commitments. Iran implemented the deal, and the United States didn't. And that was one of the mistakes of the negotiating team, and that's something that they were trying to rectify 3 years ago when they were negotiating again under President Raisi and Biden. The Iranians wanted to put a mechanism in place where the Americans first carried out their side of the bargain, and then the Iranians would carry out their side of the bargain, phase by phase or piece by piece. It's not Dr. Zarif's fault. And I don't, Dr. Balgadi was using the experience of that we had during the previous negotiations. And before Dr. Zarif, Dr. Jalili was negotiating. And I think that unlike Dr. Zarif, who was too flexible under pressure from the president at that time, Dr. Rouhani, I think Dr. Jalili was not flexible enough. But that's another story. So I find this humorous because the show will come out probably in an hour or so. And they keep saying, if this guy, meaning me, if he says anything against the regime, he'll be, killed or whatever. And Piers Morgan was saying, yes, you cannot have this sort of debate in Iran. And I told him, Piers, I invited you to come to Iran, but you didn't come. But in any case, so we have these debates in Iran. And I think this context is important for people to understand that Iran is not some authoritarian regime. Russia is not an authoritarian regime like they'd like to say in the West. And I would say that today what we're seeing in the West is much more authoritarian in many ways than many of the so-called authoritarian regimes that we are often hearing about, what they're doing to protesters and those who support Palestine. But that's a different story. So the Americans violated the deal, and then ultimately Trump tore up the deal. After Trump tore up the deal, and Scott alluded to this, I'll just expand upon it. The Iranians remained within the deal for a full year.
Yep.
And they implemented the deal. And there was a lot of criticism. One of those critics was me. I didn't say it in public, but I thought that because I don't get involved in Iranian internal politics generally, because since I'm dealing with foreign media, I may not like a president or a minister or a head of the judiciary or the parliament or whoever, but I always feel that Iran is the narrative against Iran is unfair and unjust. So I deal with that, and I don't focus on. I do get involved in debates and discussions. You can find them online, and I have said my views on all these issues in Iran, but not at the time. Later on, like months later, when it's all finished, I would online on these online shows or on television, I'd give my opinion. But I'm not hostile to either side of because I understand both sides. I understand that the position Dr. Zarif took, even though I disagreed with some parts of it. I understand why Dr. Jadidi did what he did, even though I disagreed with some things that he did, and so on. But anyway, so the Iranians implemented the deal in full as it was under maximum pressure sanctions. And then after a year, the Iranians began to decrease its obligations, its commitments to the deal in 5 stages. And it took 2 years for Iran to normalize its peaceful nuclear program after Trump had torn up the deal. So the Iranians waited 2 years. And then they restarted the program. It never ended, but many aspects of it were shut down or slowed down. So Iran expanded the program. And this is something that made the United States very unhappy. But the issue is, and this is something that I said on Hard Talk and the BBC 3 years ago when I was in Vienna, and I was a media advisor. I was never a negotiator. Dr. Zarif wanted me to be on the negotiating team, but I said no because for a host of reasons. I said I'll just be a media advisor, and I was for him, and I was for Dr. Bagheri too. So in 2015, I was in Vienna, and also 3 years ago, I was in Vienna again. So during the Vienna talks 3 years ago on the BBC Hard Talk, I think it was Steve Sacker, he said, well, why are you producing, because Iran developed its nuclear program afterwards, and then that included enriching uranium at 60%. And then I was asked by Steve Sacker, why is Iran producing 60% uranium? And I said clearly, for leverage. Because the United States was trying to strangle Iranians. It was the objective of the U.S. government by maximum pressure sanctions is to kill Iranians, is to prevent medicine from getting in, food from getting in, is to stop factories from working. Its objective is to break families. This is the same United States regime that has destroyed Gaza, that's carried out the Holocaust of our time. So I think back then, many people would say, why, how could that be the case? Often people would tell me back then, or ask me back then, was it really true that the Americans are blocking medicine? Nowadays, everything is normal. Everyone understands because all you have to do is just point at Gaza, point at Lebanon, point at Syria. People have woken up. Even with regards to Syria, people have, I think, for the most part, woken up. Except for some people who are very sectarian and who just won't accept logic. But the point is that the only way to force the United States to decrease the maximum pressure sanctions that target ordinary people is to have leverage. And part of that leverage was uranium at 60%. Part of that leverage was expanding the nuclear program. Part of that leverage was making it so deep underground that the Americans would not be able to destroy it with bunker busters and probably with nuclear weapons. And now we're seeing that in Yemen, that B-52s and B-2s, they've been unable to do any damage, as was expected, to those underground facilities, because the Iranians, the Yemenis, the Yemenis learned their lesson over 10 years, how they have to put everything underground. And the Iranians, because they've been threatened for 20 years by the United States to be bombed and to be have their country wrecked, they had to do the same thing. So all of this, it wasn't as if the Iranians wanted to build something deep underground. Initially, the nuclear program was all on the ground. It was only after the Americans began saying, well, we may bomb it, that the Iranians said, well, maybe we have to think about putting it somewhere else. So what the Americans use, and Scott is right, because they control the narrative. Western media, we all know how it works. They won't invite us at all. And if they do invite us for 5 minutes, and it's really interesting, Piers Morgan and co. expect me to criticize Iran on Western media, as it like they're doing it day and night, and then they give me 5 minutes every 6 months to speak, and they expect me to criticize Iran. I say often to my friends, my university students, because sometimes it's a question for them too, and I say, well, if the BBC gives me a TV show, a weekly show for like 30 minutes, I'll spend 10 minutes criticizing Iran, and then I'll defend Iran for 20 minutes. But they have to give me a show first. Anyway, so this for Iran is leverage. And the Iranians feel that they have no other means of forcing the United States to behave more rationally. And I agree with them. I don't see any other means. I agree with everything that Scott said besides that. I think that some people took issue with some of what Scott said, probably because of the tone. Like, for example, I think he said Iran admitted to having 60%, which I don't think Scott meant it that way, but it wasn't as if Iran was hiding it. Iran declared 60%. Or Iran's declared peaceful program, which Scott here has pointed out that it is a peaceful nuclear program. There's the intrusive inspections that Iran had within the framework of the JCPOA were unparalleled anywhere in the world. The number of inspections that were carried out in Iran, I think, equaled the entire world. All the inspections that were carried out elsewhere were like something like similar to the amount of inspections that were carried out in Iran, and they never proved that Iran had been pursuing a nuclear weapon, despite the fact that the IAEA is under American influence, despite the fact that the Europeans and the Americans dominate the organization, and the organization is definitely very much biased against Iran, but they never provided any evidence. Even when documents were stolen, or the Israeli regime claimed that they took documents and all that, no evidence was ever put out there to show that Iran had a nuclear program. Indeed, the Americans in 2007, they stated that Iran was not pursuing a nuclear weapon. They said that just recently. Tulsi Gabbard's recent statement also reaffirmed that. The CIA, Burns, the head of before he left, I think Burns also pointed that out, that Iran, the only thing that the United States says is that since 2003, and there's no evidence to show that Iran was pursuing a nuclear weapon before 2003 either. But that's a technicality. I'll leave that aside. So for Iran does not intend to build a nuclear weapon. And I know a lot of people want Iran to have a weapon. And it's very interesting how Iran has become so popular over the last year and a half. Iran has always been demonized, attacked. Iran is evil. And now a lot of people put a lot of faith in Iran, and which we can maybe get into later. But Iran does not want a nuclear weapon, because a nuclear weapon has many problems. One is that it encourages other countries in Central Asia, the Caucasus, Arabian Peninsula to pursue nuclear weapons. A lot of these are family dictatorships. not necessarily stable. And but Iran is a nuclear threshold state. And so Iran, the only reason why recently the Iranians moved in, the Iranian officials said that we will change our nuclear posture, as Dr. Kharazi said for about a year ago, and more recently Dr. Larijani said we'll move to a nuclear weapon, was if the United States strikes our nuclear program, because that would be a nuclear attack, even if conventional weapons are used, because that's a nuclear site and it will create contamination. And that is an existential threat to Iran. And so under those circumstances, Iran will develop a nuclear weapon, because then we are talking about the survival of the nation. But that is also being said in order to tell the Americans not to push so hard. Indeed, I would argue that Trump is the one who's pushed Iran's nuclear program to develop so far, because Iran, under the JCPOA, which I think we gave too many concessions, but in any case, under the JCPOA, Iran's nuclear program was limited. And after a while, Iran's nuclear program could have expanded, but still, I think the deal was flawed. But that aside, Trump, by tearing up the deal, encouraged Iran to expand the nuclear program, because not only did Iran feel the need for, because remember, Iran is very important. Iran is a very developed country in high-tech industries. In nanotechnology, it's like the third or fourth in the world. In artificial intelligence, it's doing. You see how it's conventional weapons now is the talk of the town. You know, the Americans and the Europeans claim that Iranian drones in Russia and in Ukraine have created enormous damage. So whether that's right or wrong, that's not for me to say. But if you recall, 10, 15 years ago, every time Iran fired a new missile, the West would say, this is just a show. Now they recognize that Iran, in all different fields, in nuclear and non-nuclear, Iran is an advanced country. So Iran wants nuclear energy because it is a high-tech industry. The country needs it. But Iran also pushed further in order to tell the Americans that you have to end the maximum pressure sanctions. You cannot target women and children like this. You cannot try to kill people this way. And so Trump basically pushed us in this direction, and Trump, by threatening Iran now, is pushing Iran further. So if anyone is to blame, it is the United States. Otherwise, for Iran, if a negotiated deal is always possible. We were 3 years ago, we had a deal. I was in Vienna for months. We came to a text, and on the last day of negotiations, the EU gave a final text to the different teams. On the way back, we were having a discussion on the flight. We all thought that we will be back in Vienna in 3 or 4 days for the signing ceremony. So when they got to Tehran, the Supreme National Security Council went over the text that the EU gave, which was the result of months of negotiations. The Iranians made 2 or 3 changes, like words, not like major, like 2 or 3 words the Iranians changed. They sent it back to the EU, and Joseph Borrell, who was the EU foreign policy chief, said that the Iranian demands are reasonable. You can Google this, you can use a search engine. Nowadays, you don't even have to use any. You can use DeepSeek or whatever it is, and you can find all the information. He said that Iran's demands are reasonable, and hopefully the Americans will accept, and we can move on from here. Something like that. We had a deal, and then the Americans balked because of the midterm elections, and then we had the riots in Iran, thanks to USAID and NED, and this, this woman freedom, whatever. Anyway, you know what I mean. The riots and the protests and so on, and the Americans made the wrong calculation. They believed their own propaganda about Iran, that the people were against the Islamic Republic of Iran, which is not the case. Any poll that even the West carries out in Iran shows that the state and the Constitution has overwhelming support among people who may be very critical about everything, as Iranians are, but the Americans miscalculated. And so as a result of that, the Americans refrained from signing the deal. And that's why we don't have a deal today. Otherwise, we almost had one. Trump, instead of behaving rationally, he's behaving dangerously. But that is something that the Iranians will have to deal with. The Iranians are willing to negotiate, but they won't negotiate from a position of weakness. So this is where I think this is, I think, the key point right now. The Americans want direct negotiations, and Iran says indirect negotiations. Some people say why. The reason is that Trump has to recognize that we will not negotiate on his terms. Ultimately, the negotiations will be indirect on Saturday. Of course, the Iranians are some are worried that the Americans will try to find a way to meet the Iranian negotiators in the hallway, and there's a lot of talk about that in the Iranian media. Some want direct negotiations, but I think there's a strong consensus that indirect negotiations are more than enough. Is that strange? No, the Russians and the Ukrainians don't have direct negotiations, as an example. We've had direct negotiations with Americans. We've had indirect negotiations with Americans. During Biden's 4 years, we had indirect negotiations. When I was in Vienna for those few months, the negotiations between Iran and the United States were not direct. So Trump demanded direct negotiations. The fact that he made that demand made the Iranians say no, indirect negotiations. And then the United States wanted the negotiations to be somewhere else, and the Iranians said no, Oman. And Iran imposed that. These are not big things, but these are symbolic. If the United States behaves reasonably, Iran will be able to have a deal and preserve its peaceful nuclear program and provide whatever assurances that are necessary to show that Iran is not producing nuclear weapons. However, if Trump thinks that he can put pressure on Iran and get what he wants, and the Iranians will be intimidated, and that's not going to work. It didn't work with Russia. It's not working with China, and it's definitely not going to work with Iran. I would argue that the chances of it working with Iran are less than with Russia and China for a host of reasons, cultural reasons, especially the Shia culture in Iran, and the story of Imam Hussein, the grandson of the Prophet. That makes Iranians very practical people, but also steadfast in principles. So we'll have to see how Trump behaves. And Iran obviously does not trust Trump. We dislike him immensely. We dislike Witkoff. I dislike Witkoff. He's a Zionist. And Witkoff, he was behind the ceasefire, and in his interview with Tucker Carlson, he was very dishonest. Hamas and the resistance, they were abiding by the ceasefire that Witkoff had pushed for, and Witkoff and Trump were the ones who effectively tore up the agreement. And that is why the Iranians are going to be very cautious about Trump, because Trump violates not just the deal that Obama made. He violates his own deals, whether it's NAFTA, that he made an agreement with the Canadians and the Mexicans during his first term, or deals that were signed, as Scott knows more about, with the Soviet Union and with regards to nuclear weapons and missiles. He breaks all deals. He's an untrustworthy person, and so it is going to be very difficult for the Iranians to negotiate with such a person, and to rest assured that after the deal is signed, tomorrow morning Trump doesn't post something on and say, no, I don't accept the deal.
Yeah, Scott, I definitely want you to reply to anything there. I also wanted to mention a few things. Also, though, what's striking to me is that Donald Trump's approach here, the United States' approach, around the nuclear question with Iran has been very hostile, to say the least. But Professor Marandi brought up the threat assessment, the U.S. intelligence threat assessment. It says quite clearly, we continue to assess Iran as not building a nuclear weapon. Direct quote. But yet he began with sending a threatening letter, bombers to Diego Garcia, and is according to the New York Times, the U.S. position appears to be that they want to not only dismantle a vast nuclear fuel enrichment infrastructure of Iran, the country's missile program as well, and Iran's longtime support for the axis of resistance. What do you make of this? These are very maximalist positions. What do you make of this direction? And perhaps, of course, first, if you want to respond to anything that Professor Marandi said.
I'll just say it in 2 sentences so Scott can continue. There is not a chance in the world that Iran is going to give up its allies in the region. Not a chance in the world. And there's not a chance in the world that it's going to give up its conventional capabilities, because Iran knows what will happen subsequently. The United States is ruthless, the regime, I mean, and the Israeli regime is totally barbaric. So those are off the table. The nuclear program, as long as Iran's sovereignty is preserved, negotiations can take place. We've done them many times before, but excessive demands will not be accepted, especially because Iran feels that the world has changed. The Americans have lost the war in Ukraine. The Americans, we saw yesterday that Trump blinked first, and that was because of the crash in the bond market, as it turned out.
Professor Marandi, let's get to Scott soon. Yeah, let's get to Scott though. Finish up, please.
Yeah, sure, I'm finished. That was it, basically.
Okay. Scott.
Well, before I start, I just want to say it's been a pleasure knowing you, Professor Marandi, and I'm sorry that your government's going to arrest you shortly after this program and bring you to the justice you so richly deserve. But I just want to. I'm saying that.
I'm sure Pierce would be very happy to see that happen.
I just want to remind the viewers real quick. When was the last time the Iranian security services kicked down your door, Professor Marandi, and seized your computers and stole your papers? Never.
I know. Yeah.
When was the last time the FBI kicked down my door and stole my computers and stole my papers? Past August. So when we're talking about countries that oppress people for speaking out, Iran's not the problem. The United States is the problem. So let's keep that straight. Look, I'm not going to sit here and Professor Marandi and I've tried to make this point. And I will say this. Look, my background is not of diplomacy. I've been a diplomat. I've done diplomatic things. My background is as a United States Marine, and that includes my experience as weapons inspectors. Marines are very direct. We're very blunt, and we can become brutally blunt. And so, in the process of this, of these negotiations or these interactions, I'll say, I've been very blunt, and sometimes my bluntness might be misinterpreted. But there is no daylight between Dr. Marandi and I when it comes to the facts of the situation. No daylight whatsoever. I wrote a book about Donald Trump pulling out of the JCPOA. You know what the title was? Deal breaker. Right? He's a deal breaker. He's not a deal maker. He's a deal breaker. We know this. It's not anything. So where does the problem arise? The problem arises, again, it's not an Iranian problem, it's an American problem. Do you remember when I talked about the JCPOA? I said the problem with the JCPOA wasn't because of what Iran did, it's how America behaved, how Barack Obama boxed himself into a corner with his irresponsible rhetoric threatening war, and finally be confronted with the fact that he had reached that threshold where either we go to war or we make a compromise. Okay, at that time, the United States was not prepared to go to war with Iran. We didn't have the capacity to do so. We had, we were in knee deep in, conflicts in the Middle East. We were trying to get ourselves disentangled in Iraq and Afghanistan. And the last thing we were going to do is get involved in a major war with Iran. And one of the reasons is that the war was being couched at that time in purely conventional terms. Iran's program had not gone underground. Iran's program had not developed to the extent that it was a breakout or threshold capability. So from a military planning perspective, the belief was that we could interdict Iran's programs using conventional weapons alone, precision guided strike, etc. And then the realization came that, yeah, we probably weren't going to achieve that objective. And now once we initiate something, we would have to follow through with follow-on military action, which would require hundreds of thousands of troops in a proposition where victory was not guaranteed. And we just weren't going to go to war against Iran. So we opted the negotiation path. I would say that Trump has boxed himself into a similar corner. What is the one thing that's in common between Obama's position, Biden's position, and Trump's position? Is that the Israeli government has been pressuring the United States to launch military attacks against Iran for some time now. The other thing that connects everybody through this time is that the policy of the United States has never been singularly focused on Iran's nuclear program, but on regime change. And the sanctions program that we have been enforcing against Iran is a regime change program. It's the same mentality, the same prospects. I've been studying OFAC, the Office of Foreign Asset Control. I've been studying their interaction with the Department of Treasury, with CIA, the State Department, on how they impose sanctions on Iraq. Iraq's sanction program was a regime change sanction program. Okay, Syria, a regime change sanction program. Libya, a regime change sanctions program. This is what we do. And we've been imposing a regime change sanction program on Iran since 2002. Some would say even prior to that. We have never tolerated the Islamic Republic. We've always viewed the Islamic Republic as an affront. We were supporters of the Shah. So we obviously were upset when the Shah was overthrown. The seizure of the American embassy and that whole hostage debacle, which concluded with American troops dying, 8 of them dying, perishing in fire on Desert One. That anniversary is coming up, April 25th. This scarred.
Just for your viewers, because many of them won't know this, but the Iranians didn't kill them. The Americans, their helicopters crashed and hit each other in Iran, and 8 of them were killed.
Correct. No, Iran most certainly didn't kill anybody. It was our helicopter crashing into a C-130 tanker that killed 8 American crew members. But we blame Iran because we say we wouldn't have been there if the hostages hadn't been taken, et cetera. I'm not going to get into discussion about that. What I'm trying to do is say that there's the history of the bombing of the Marine barracks. All of this lends itself to a very negative attitude on the part of the United States. We've spoken, Danny, you and I, about Russophobia many times and how the administration and the media poisons the minds of the American people about Russia. There has been, I don't know what we would call it, Iranophobia, but there's been the equivalent since 1979. We don't give Iran any benefit of the doubt. We condemn them. It's a blanket condemnation across the board with little or no effort to learn the reality of Iran. I've been to Iran one time in 2006, shortly after Ahmadinejad came into his presidency. I was shocked by what I saw. And what I mean by shocked is I was expecting a police state. I was expecting repression. I was expecting to be arrested the moment I got off the airplane, even though I was invited to go to Iran by Mr. Zarif, who was the ambassador at that time to the United Nations. And what I saw was a nation full of wonderful people who celebrated life. I was there during one of the big Iranian festivals. Maybe you know the one. They put lights in the streets and they build these monuments, these gateways, and just a beautiful time when people you walk out and people are barbecuing and they're giving you. I mean, you walk in and you're just fed for free as you walk by the various restaurants and stuff. They give you rose flavored water. It was beautiful. And the discussions were lively and energetic. And I was in restaurants where I had Revolutionary Guard. I mix up with the Iraqis, Revolutionary Guard at the table, and professors would show up and they'd be having this free for all. And I'm expecting, handcuffs to come out and the billy clubs to come out. And they just sat there and they did it in front of me, a foreigner, having a very energetic discussion. I didn't see oppression. I'm not saying it didn't exist. I'm saying I didn't see it. And I also realized that we had been lied about everything about Iran. I knew that the nuclear program was a lie, but how we treated the Iranian people, how we treated the Islamic Republic, how we treated Ahmadinejad himself, who, I'm not going to say he's my favorite person in the world, but I'm just saying that the way we presented him here in the United States is different from the way he was actually existed in Iran. We don't need to get into I know that he's not the most popular person in Iran either. But my point is the Iranians can talk about this. So there is a freedom of expression in Iran that surpasses anything Piers Morgan or the other Iranophobes could ever possibly imagine. So, I'm not going to sit here and say anything bad about Iran. It's just not going to happen. The problem isn't Iran's fault. The problem is America's fault, 100%. But that doesn't mean it isn't your problem too. This is the point I've been trying to make. You see, Obama had a conventional military problem thrust upon him. Trump, in his first term, confronted by the reality of what Iran had done legally, not illegally, legally, but 60% enrichment, going underground, etc., when they had to look at the potential for military action, conventional military power was insufficient to achieve anything. We couldn't even begin a conventional fight with Iran because the consequences would be immediate and devastating against us. Iran has ballistic missile capacity to reach out and touch American installations in the region. We have no defense against this. Iran has the ability to damage or destroy the energy production capacity of the Middle East, gas and oil. And there's nothing we can do. They can shut down the Strait of Hormuz on demand. Nothing we can do. We have no conventional military response to Iran. So what Trump did is task the American nuclear establishment through a nuclear posture review and then nuclear employment plans to develop a nuclear response to Iran. Now, me saying this doesn't mean I approve of it. I condemn it wholeheartedly, but it is a reality and it's not theoretical. This is real. These nuclear weapons that were produced on the direction of Donald Trump have been produced, have been deployed, and are incorporated into a plan of military action against Iran's nuclear infrastructure. So this is when I talk about the threat of nuclear war. It's not that I'm threatening you. I hope you don't take what I'm saying as a threat, Dr. Marandi. I'm not threatening you or the Iranian people. I'm stating reality. The reality is Donald Trump's rhetoric has boxed him into a corner where we have created a problem for which there is only one solution, and that's the military solution, which has been configured exclusively to use nuclear weapons. This is insane. This is crazy. This is lunatic, but it's real. It's as real as the day is long. And so what I've been saying is that, okay, Dr. Marandi, you accurately said that Iran did what it did after 2019, after they gave the West a year. They did what they did for leverage. But that leverage worked too well. You see, now your leverage has allowed the Trump administration and others to see. In the past, when we talked about Iran's nuclear program, it was propaganda. When people said Iran is this far away from nuclear weapons, propaganda. Hell, excuse my language. Netanyahu's been saying Iran's been on the cusp of nuclear weapons since 1995. I mean, Iran's been 2 weeks away from a nuclear weapon for 30 years, except today they are 2 weeks away from a nuclear weapon. That's the problem. We went from propaganda to reality. Your leverage has become so effective that this crazy, insane plan, which under normal circumstances, the Pentagon would say, Mr. President, we're not going to nuke Iran. It's disproportional. The military necessity is not there. It's a violation of the international law, etc. The Pentagon now says the only way we can attack Iran is with nuclear weapons. You were too successful. Your leverage worked too much. But in a way, and this is where we might have a difference of opinion, because I'm not going to be insulting to the Iranians at all, but I believe that your leadership recognizes the danger that exists. I believe your leadership understands that this insane man, this deal breaker, is in power today, and that he has an arsenal which if he opts to use against Iran will be devastating to Iran. You may be able to land some punches that hurt, but I believe it would be fatal for Iran. I don't believe Iran can ride out an American nuclear attack because I've been a war planner and I understand the mentality of those who plan wars, and we don't go in lightly when we do nation-ending exercises. There's the mistake people make in talking about Iraq, talking about Afghanistan, talking about Yemen even. These are not, I mean, first of all, Iraq was a nation-ending exercise, and we succeeded in ending the nation of Iraq in terms of the government of Saddam Hussein. We succeeded in pushing the Taliban out, but these weren't nation-destroying exercises. These were government alteration exercises. Iran is a nation-ending event, meaning that if we go to war against Iran, it will be a nation-ending event. It will be so horrible. And I'm not justifying this. I condemn it. I don't want it to happen. I also recognize that the consequences of this will be horrific, not only for the Iranian people, but for the United States and the region. Because Iran, no war goes as it's planned. I don't think we can kill all of the Iranians in day one. And I think Iran will have a retaliation. And where are we? Nowhere. But the good news is, if there can be good news in any of this, is the supreme leader. And I'm going to say something again. I don't mean to be insulting, and please don't take it as an insult. But history has shown that when Iran has been confronted with nation-ending circumstances, that the supreme leader drank the poisoned chalice that was offered to him. And you know what I'm talking about, Professor Marandi, the end of the Iran-Iraq war, which ended in ways that Iran did not want. Iran had to accept things it did not want, but the leadership made a decision because it was the only decision that could be made to save the Iranian people. The leadership today, the supreme leader and those around him, have come out strongly against maximum pressure. Of course they have. And if they've come out strongly against the military threats, of course they have. But they know the only way out is negotiation. The question is, how do we get to the right negotiations? And that's the question. But I think what's happened here is both Iran and Trump have blinked. Trump has backed down. Danny, you said, the letter that was written to the supreme leader was an insulting letter. I apologize on behalf of the American people for that letter. Horrible letter. But it made demands about ballistic missiles and made demands about relationships and things. But Trump modified that statement before he sent Steve Witkoff off to Oman. He said, all I care about is the nuclear. All I care about is the nuclear, which means that Trump blinked. And now Iran, even though Iran is saying we're not going to do direct negotiations, we're going to do indirect, it doesn't matter. The point is, your foreign minister is going to be sitting down in the immediate vicinity of Steve Witkoff, and there's going to be an exchange of ideas. A negotiation is beginning that could lead to a resolution of the nuclear problem, and therefore giving Trump a way out of the problem he has created. This is a problem that Iran didn't create, a problem we created, but it's a danger to Iran. And thank goodness, because a lot of my criticism to Iran in the past weeks is the rejection of negotiations. And I kept saying there's only one way out of this. This lunatic, this madman, this deal breaker will use nuclear weapons. He's not bluffing. This is a real crisis. And the only way out is through negotiation. Now, how does Iran do this without looking weak, without being accused of bending the knee? I think we found the solution. Whether it was by design or by accident, Trump blinked, And then Iran said, okay, we're not opposed to negotiations. And now we're having negotiations. What happens in these negotiations? I can't predict. I don't think you can predict. Steve Witkoff, who I know you despise, but what I would say is this. Let's put Gaza aside, difficult to do given the enormity of the crimes being committed. He's the man that traveled to Moscow and broke the ice with Vladimir Putin, got through the impasse that prevented the United States and Russia from moving forward in their negotiations. He did that. Why? Because he is literally an extension of Donald Trump. And when he travels and speaks, he speaks as Donald Trump. And when he's in Oman right now, he is Donald Trump. And I think the Iranians understand this. Now, he said something interesting. I don't know what's going to happen from this, but he said, I'm prepared to travel to Iran. Now, we can be dismissive of it, but Professor Marandi, when was the last time the Biden administration said they're prepared to travel to Iran? They never said that. The Obama administration was not prepared to travel to Iran. Trump is saying, Witkoff, go to Iran if necessary. We want a deal. See, you won. You won. You use your leverage to get the United States to the negotiating table. It's very good, but it was a dangerous game. This is what I've been trying to point out. I exposed the danger, not because I'm threatening Iran, but I'm being real about this because as I've told people, I ask people to love the Iranians more than they hate America. Love the Iranians more than they hate America. And what I mean by that is you are right to criticize Trump, criticize this, criticize that, but don't be so critical of America that you miss the opportunity for a deal that can save Iran. It may be a bitter chalice of poison. It's going to be because you're going to have to make some sort of compromises. So it will be bitter. But Iran survived drinking that cup of poison in 1989. They survived. They thrived. And Iran will survive and thrive going forward. Russia just gave Iran the best way out. They just ratified a strategic framework agreement, which is telling the Iranians, cut a deal with America, and we will work with you to open you up to the East, to complete that pivot that Iran's been trying to make since the early 2000s.
Scott, let's get to Professor Marandi soon, if you could wrap up. Do you have anything you want to? Oh, sorry. I just wanted to.
I'm just saying that the only way out of this is through negotiation. That's it.
Professor Marandi, please respond to anything that Scott put out there.
There are 3 or 4 things that I would like to say, although I'm not sure if I remember them all. They're not criticisms. They're just points that I'd like to make. One is with regards to the Iran-Iraq war, which Scott knows I was involved in that war. I fought as a volunteer for years. When the leader, Imam Khomeini, accepted Resolution 598, it was a bitter drink for him, not or a poisonous drink for him, not because Iran was on the verge of collapsing, but because Iran wanted to overthrow Saddam Hussein for all of the crimes he had committed against the Iranian people. Remember, he was giving chemical weapons by the West. He slaughtered. The war was unprovoked. The West supported him. Arab regimes supported him. The Eastern Bloc supported him. And it was a bitter 8 years. And Iran was moving to unseat the regime when the Americans came into the Persian Gulf and started fighting alongside Saddam Hussein, then downing an Iranian airliner. And so he accepted the Resolution 598, but he accepted because Resolution 598 did accept Iran's sovereignty. And if there was no Resolution 598, he would not have accepted a ceasefire because then Saddam would have just continued the war. So we had a basis. The reason why Iran didn't initially accept Resolution 598, which was passed during the height of the war, like a year or so before the ceasefire, during the Karbala 5 operations where I was shot in the arm. I was a military diver in that operation. That was the height of the war. It was very intense battles near Basra. And it was under that pressure that the UN Security Council passed Resolution 598, which met Iran's demands except for one demand, and that was that determining the aggressor was put down like in, I don't know, Article 8, and Iran wanted it to be in Article 1 because Iran knew that the US and the West would never allow Saddam to be condemned. That was the issue. So we had an acceptable agreement. It wasn't ideal for Iran, but Iran's sovereignty was respected, and so we ended the war. We preserved our sovereignty. Saddam Hussein failed, and his failure was reflected in the fact that his country was bankrupt and he went and invaded Kuwait. Of course, the US ambassador, the story between Saddam and her, all that aside, but he went into Kuwait and we had a new chapter in our region. So our ceasefire with Saddam Hussein was based on a resolution that preserved our sovereignty. And ultimately, Saddam was condemned, but that's a different story. The second issue is Scott is right about Iranophobia, I guess. I don't know what it's called. Islamophobia, Iranophobia, Shiaphobia. I mean, one of the things that the Americans did and the Europeans was that they antagonized Iran for decades, and then their client regimes in the region, they antagonized Iran through sectarianism and racism. They basically were telling their own people that we're not Muslim. That's where the whole Wahhabism and ISIS and Al-Qaeda began to grow, and the extremist ideologies that we see in Afghanistan and elsewhere. I've been told during pilgrimage and Hajj by fellow Muslims that I'm not a Muslim, that you have a different Quran. Or for example, they would constantly tell me, and they still do, that we Shia do taqiyya, which means that we hide the way they interpret it, we hide our true intentions, and sort of like we're hypocrites. Whereas taqiyya in the Quran is about people who are at the risk of, according to Islam, they're at the risk of being killed, and they hide their identity or their beliefs so that they don't get killed. And it was a companion of the Prophet who did this, and then the Quran said that's fine, basically. But interestingly, the same people and so this has nothing to Iran with Iran's policy. Iran has always been open about its support for the resistance, for Hamas, for Islamic Jihad, Iran has been the most open about its views. But interestingly, the same people now they say, well, Mr. Erdogan, he's lying. He's doing a great job. He's pretending to the West that he's their ally, and in reality, he's undermining the West and working for the Palestinian cause, which of course is nonsense. But they say, and I would say to them, then the taqiyya that you're saying we do, in fact, you do, and you support this. So the point is, of course, these are just sectarian people. Most Sunnis and most Shias and most Muslims and most Christians and Jews, as we've seen, who are very active and anti-Zionist in the United States and Europe. Most people are decent, and most people want to live together in peace and prosperity. And it's these regimes like, Qatar has funded a lot of this, Saudi Arabia, sadly, Erdogan, others, the Americans. This divide and rule policy has been going on for 40-some decades. And so Iran is not only antagonized in the West, but it's antagonized in the region. That's a very long story, but it's interesting how it has evolved over the last year and a half, because in reality, the only people who are supporting the Palestinians are the resistance, and it's Iran that is alongside Yemen and Hezbollah that they're paying a heavy price, whereas Erdogan is selling his oil or transporting Aliyev's oil. The Emirates, they have good relations. The Egyptian regime, the Jordanian regime, and the list goes on. They all have excellent relations. So interestingly, the things have shifted a lot with regards to perceptions about Iran and Iranian intentions. And everyone has been exposed, I think. In Syria, I think Scott knows quite well, and perhaps you too, Danny. In 2012, 13, 14, overwhelming, when we were saying, look, this is a dirty war, we were attacked across the board. Even some of our mutual friends back then were saying the opposite of what they're doing today. But since they're honest and sincere and they saw that they made mistakes, they shifted their position. But now we see that, except for very extreme sectarianism and foolish Americans who are very ignorant about reality and listen to Fox News or CNN and so on, except for these people, people are recognizing the truth. People are much more awake than before. The only point, and just one thing, Scott, and again, it's about tone, because in one of your tweets, which I didn't respond to this, I just said that Iran is not violating the JCPOA and so on by being the NPT and the IAEA by being a nuclear threshold state. What you said, which I think was and I didn't respond to this because I knew that's not what you meant, but what some people perceive to be critical of Iran or supportive of the United States. I think you said something like, hopefully Iran will put aside its dismantle parts of its program that the United States and Israel find to be like some sort of existential threat. And I think, and I'm sure you don't mean it in that way, because everything that you said today, I agree with about the history of the program, the nature of the program, the nature of the relationship. But that is, I think we all have to focus, as you've been doing tonight, on the fact that it's not Iran that's the existential threat. It's the United States. It's the Israeli regime, which you've been pointing out tonight. And I think maybe some people who were attacking you, and I never have attacked you online, and you're the only person probably that I've been on your show at 3 a.m. I don't do that. If you recall, once I came on your show, it was like 3 in the morning. So
I remember that.
out of respect, out of respect for what you do, you invited me, I think, twice, and I think both were pretty late, if I'm not mistaken. But all I can say at the end, and because this is that Iran takes that into consideration, but Iran also is preparing itself for that situation. In other words, Iran has underground drone bases and missile bases across the country. And there are so many that I think they're probably in the hundreds. And they are prepared for that day that the Americans do carry out that. And the Americans would have to use hundreds of nuclear weapons to prevent Iran from taking out everything. And when Iran takes out everything, that means the global economy is gone. And what we saw with the stock market and all that will be nothing compared to that. I don't want to see that. You don't want to see that. None of us want to see it. But this is sort of like, and it's not equal in power, but it is a sort of mutual assured destruction. It is math. The same thing that preserved the balance between the United States and the Soviet Union. So in the case of Iran, it's because Iran, fortunate or not fortunate, all these oil and gas assets in the Persian Gulf and Caucasus are right in front of Iran, and a lot of American bases and a lot of oil and gas wealth. And these regimes in the Persian Gulf are very small, very tiny, and they are complicit because they are hosting American bases. Qatar right now, the Emirates, Saudi Arabia, all of them are actually helping the United States bomb Yemen. And even Turkey. Turkish bases are their radar stations. They are used to help the Americans in Yemen, and they were used to help the Americans shoot down Iranian drones and unsuccessfully bring down Iranian missiles. They couldn't bring down the missiles in True Promise True, but they used Turkish radar in Turkey and in the Persian Gulf to help Israel. In any case, the point I'm making is that I don't want war. You don't want war. Your intentions are absolutely benign, and so are mine, and so is Danny's, and I think almost all of our viewers. Maybe there are a few Zionists listening and doing what they like to do, or these Wahhabis or these sectarians. Yeah, there are a few out down there, but I think that overwhelmingly people understand where the problem lies. Hopefully, what we all have to do is put pressure on the regime in Washington to end the genocide in Gaza, to behave more reasonably. As Scott pointed out, Iranians do not hate Westerners. They do not hate. When they say death to America, they mean the regime in Washington. but Iranians have no problems with Americans. Many guests have come to Iran, many Americans. I would say that Iranians are among the most friendly people in the world. Seriously, I'm not saying it as an Iranian. I'm not actually that sort of person. I think I went to Lebanon as soon as the bombing began, before Sayyid Hassan was martyred. Out of responsibility, out of a sense of as a human being, I went there. I've no all for me, all human beings are the same wherever they are in the world. But Iranians, at least in this day and age, they are among the most friendly, kind people. It's a very, very open society. It's not a utopia. It has many problems. But if you walk down the street in Iran, you will not see police officers. And if every now and then you do see a vehicle and you think it's a police officer or a police car, it's actually most probably a traffic cop. Because they have they are the color of the two cars are somewhat similar. In Iran, if you see a policeman, you may see people arguing with a policeman on the streets over whatever. I don't think you do that. People do that in the United States. And Scott's own experience, sadly, because of his political views, I think is evidence of that. Again, I'm not saying Iran is a utopia, but I think that Iran's role in today's world has been heroic. Iran has been has been under a lot of pressure, despite the pressure that supported the Palestinian people, and we should all focus on putting pressure on the United States to behave more reasonably. And without a doubt, the Iranians will, as they have in the past, behave reasonably, but within the framework of preserving its sovereignty, and it will continue to support Palestine and the Palestinian people.
I did have one final topic I wanted to cover with you guys. If you have the time, Professor Marandi, do you have it? Scott, are you okay?
Yeah. Could I just say two things real quick?
Okay, sure. Yeah. And then we can get to it after that.
I know we're running out of time and all this, but
no.
Just to put things in perspective, when I say things such as an existential threat to the United States and Israel, that doesn't mean that I believe it's an existential threat to the United States and Israel. I'm saying that the perception amongst the decision makers in Washington, D.C. and Tel Aviv is that, and here's what we get, your self-acknowledged leverage. Now, it's only leverage because it represents a potential, as you said, a threshold potential. Israel used to say that one spinning centrifuge was an existential threat to Iran. And they were trying to justify American military action against Iran to eliminate Iran from having the most basic centrifuge enrichment capabilities. So imagine these same people are there today. We have the same mindset, but now instead of one spinning centrifuge, they're confronted with a nuclear threshold capability that Iran has said is leverage. That's why what I'm saying is the perception that exists in Washington, D.C. and in Tel Aviv today is far different than the perception that existed a decade ago, because today it's real. Today, the leverage that you speak of that has taken Iran to a nuclear threshold capacity can legitimately be called an existential threat to the state of Israel, and therefore the United States, which, for better or for worse, has embraced Israel as our close ally, we assume that rhetoric. So that's what I meant. I'm not saying that I view it as an existential threat. I'm saying that the perception is, and then we come to what do you do about it? Because the other point I've been trying to make to people is that there's a difference between perception that is propaganda driven and perception that is reality driven. The perception that existed in the past about Iran's nuclear program was propaganda driven. Iran couldn't be said to have anything close to a nuclear weapons program. You know that, and I know that. But as you've said today, a threshold program takes Iran, or a leverage program takes Iran to a threshold status, which is a different reality altogether. This is real. This isn't fake. It's there. And so the perception amongst the decision makers is driven by a different level of emotions. And so now this attaches to war planning. People will say the United States will never use nuclear weapons against Iran. I would like to believe that's the case, but I know it's not. Because let's take a look at mutually assured destruction in the past. The United States and the Soviet Union had mutually assured destruction. The United States cannot live under mutually assured destruction because we are the world's hegemon. We have to be in charge. We have to be the ones that call the shots. That's just a sad reality of who America is today. And so what we did is we prepared nuclear preemptive strikes against the Soviet Union. Even when we had treaties that were designed to prevent this during the Reagan administration, we began planning nuclear preemptive strikes. Now, fortunately, we had arms control that interfered it, but under George W. Bush and Barack Obama, we began planning nuclear preemptive strikes. And I have to tell you, when America plans something, that means it's a real potential. It's not theoretical. It's a war plan. It's been thoroughly staffed. It's gone out. The weapons exist. Every aspect of the plan exists. And we have a plan that people believe, if used preemptively, could eliminate the vast majority of the things that you have talked about. I can't say that it would. I hope we never find out. But I bring it up not as a threat to Iran, but it's just a statement of the reality of the danger of the situation we face today. This is a horrifically dangerous situation brought solely upon by the irresponsible policies of the United States. But, you know, when we all have dealt with irresponsible people, and sometimes the best way for when somebody's misbehaving is to provide them an off-ramp. To provide an off-ramp. Don't let the misbehavior manifest itself until it explodes into violence, but provide an off-ramp. And negotiations are the off-ramp. And I agree with you. The negotiations have to be done in a way that is respectful of Iran's sovereignty, respectful of Iran's dignity, and respectful of Iran's legitimate needs and requirements. And the nuclear program is a legitimate need. I don't think any responsible person would say Iran needs to get rid of the totality of its nuclear program. That may be Steve Witkoff's opening gambit. I think it'll be shot down immediately, and he will immediately fall back to plan B, which I think is going to be about eliminating the leverage that you speak of. I think that's what the United States is going to be focused on, eliminating the leverage so that the perception of an existential threat can be made null and void. But I just wanted to put that out there because, again, I shouldn't be this. I'm 63 years old. I'm an adult. I've done enough in my life that I don't have to worry about impressing anybody. But I have an ego. And because I actually believe that I'm doing the right thing for Iran, not for Iran, but for humanity by trying to prevent a war, I get somewhat bruised when I hear people accuse me of being an agent of America, an agent of Israel, or somehow being anti-Iran. And so that's why I wanted to just take the extra time to put this in perspective, especially when you say it, because you know, we've never met personally, but we've met, you know, this, and I view you as a friend. I admire you. I admire your work.
But I've never said that. I have never said that.
Never.
No.
What my concern was that you felt maybe you felt that I was a little too harsh in my tweet, or that somehow it could be. So I wanted to make sure that you knew that there's a background to what I do. Sometimes it's a little rough and all that, but it's never meant to be insulting to you or the Iranian people.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I just again, Danny, sorry, maybe this would just be that extension that you were talking about. First of all, I tweeted that anyone who insults you, no one should insult you, and that's not right. I think when we had our first exchange a week or two ago, I said that, and I just think some of the wording could have been a bit more nuanced, if that's the right way to put it, elegant, but because it can be misinterpreted. Just like now, I would put it this way: that I don't think the perception in Washington really is that Iran wants to build a nuclear weapon. It may be that the idiots around Trump, because they're just Christian Zionist extremists, that they want to think that way. But I think that intelligence gathering agencies, as they pointed out, they know that Iran is not pursuing a nuclear weapon, and that Iran has no interest in that for reasons that I've explained earlier. Even though I know some of Iran supporters, many, I know across the world, people are saying, why don't you, you should build a nuclear weapon. under extreme circumstances, Iran will, and the Iranians say the Americans cannot stop them, and if that happens, but Iran does not want that to happen. So I don't again, I think it is still narrative building. It is still propaganda. Some people in power may believe that propaganda, but I think the people who need to know that that's not the case. The second point that I should that I'd like to make is that with regards to the negotiations, Iran never, as you pointed out, and as we all know, Iran never rejected negotiations. Iran has always had negotiations with the United States, but mostly indirect. And Iran under Biden continued with that. And under Trump, messages go back and forth. Sometimes there'll be direct negotiations. And Iran has always been reasonable. The issue for Iran has been its sovereignty, but also for Iran, the issue of Palestine will not change. I mean, it's quite stunning for me, and I'm very saddened to see that some people who are attacking you or who've attacked you, some people, not all. I think so. I think so many who've criticized you, they read those tweets that I'm telling you about, and they felt that you were sort of siding with the Americans, but you've explained today that that's not what you meant. But I think that some who are criticizing, they're, for example, we see people right now who are unwilling to criticize the government of Turkey, unwilling to criticize the government of Qatar, they're unwilling to criticize the government of the Emirates. Why? Because they're getting money from them. Many of these websites, news sites, TV channels, there are many people who are being funded right now, and as a result, they are forced to abide by the policies that are acceptable to these regimes. So, if you know I think Danny has seen me say this multiple times on his show in particular. My argument is that all of our energy should be focused on those who are carrying out genocide, those who are carrying out slaughter, whether it's against the people of Yemen, whether it's in Lebanon, whether it's in Palestine, and to attack and criticize those who are supporting the Israeli regime, those who are sending aid to the regime, those who are cooperating with the regime, whether in this region or beyond. We do not have the luxury of attacking one another, of assault, accusing one another. All our energies have to be focused on the regime in Washington and all those who are supporting this Holocaust in Gaza and all of those who are supporting the crimes that have been committed against Lebanon. Those who've made the biggest sacrifices are the people of Lebanon and the people of Yemen. And they've sent their children to fight to save the people of Gaza. Thousands in Lebanon have been martyred because of Gaza, not for their own sake, for another people. No one is doing this except for Yemen. They are making sacrifices for another people. So these I think should be our models. These are our role models, Hezbollah and Ansarullah. And I think it's when we see that these people have made such sacrifices for the people of Palestine, I think the rest of us have a responsibility to remain united. We may have many differences on many different issues, but we have to remain united and put pressure on the enemy. Put pressure, and the enemy is those who carry out genocide, wherever that genocide on this planet may be. Today it's in Gaza. It is probably the worst crime in the last few hundred years, not because of the numbers, but because of the fact that they're doing it shamelessly in front of everyone and the whole world. They're killing kids every day, day and night, and they won't stop, and they're doing it in front of us. In the past, we'd hear about these things. We'd read about them in the history books. We'd hear that what they did in Kenya or in Algeria or in Southern Africa or in South Asia or in East Asia or in our part of the world. But now we're watching it on a daily basis. It's sickening. It's for me, I tweet a lot. I tweet a lot of the footage, and believe me, I don't like doing this. It's just to keep people, remind people that it's still happening. Otherwise, it just waking up and tweeting and finding a clip of some beheaded kid or something like that is very, sometimes my family knows it weighs me down. But we have to keep doing this until we all have to do our part, until ethno-supremacism, racism, ethnic cleansing, genocide comes to an end. And people from all walks of life are a part of the resistance. Jews are a part of the resistance. We have many Jewish friends who have shows both Scott and I have been on, heroes who are part of the resistance. People from all across the world. We have to all remain focused on the enemy, and the enemy is those who kill innocent people.
Yeah. Well said, Professor Marandi. You guys, I did have one last thing I wanted to cover. Are you okay with that? Just because Scott said something I definitely wanted both of your opinions on. First, Scott, to elaborate,
Sure.
and then Professor Marandi, you to maybe to
Unlike what you think, where I sit for these programs, for these interviews, isn't very uncomfortable.
Oh, it's
No,
very
it isn't.
uncomfortable. Oh no, it looks like a flat. Yeah,
it looks very nice, but I'm actually not in a very comfortable position.
Oh, geez.
But it's because of the boots here. I want to make it look nicer and to look smart, perhaps.
Hey, it's important.
Yeah.
It's important.
But I haven't read all of these by no means. Yes,
hey,
ask the question.
At least you admit it. Most people don't. Well, Scott, let me just begin with you, because earlier you were talking about this nation-ending exercise that the United States is planning under the Trump administration, as we speak. And you've talked about today how that immediately goes nuclear. You've been on my show before too about escalations with Iran that are actually happening as we've, they've been happening under the Trump administration, sending, for example, the aircraft carriers, which, in the past you've talked about how Iran has missiles that can take those out. So what does this nation-ending plan look like that goes nuclear, and what exactly would be the consequences? Because we've talked to some about MAD, but we've also talked about how it'd be devastating for Iran. But it appears to me there's so much devastation to go around with this. How exactly does this happen or occur and work?
Well, I've not been in the government for a long time. And if I were in the government, we wouldn't be having this conversation. So there'd be a lot of speculation that goes into us. But let me just say, let me paint the picture of the thinking that's behind this. The first problem that will be put up there is, how do we rapidly eliminate Iran's nuclear infrastructure? And Iran, unfortunately for it, has been totally compliant with its obligations under the safeguards agreement. So there is no secret here. We know where Iran's programs are. Inspectors go there. And I'm pretty sure Iran understands that these inspectors are debriefed in detail by foreign intelligence who are looking for weaknesses. Now, the IAEA can pretend that it doesn't happen. And I'm not saying that I know that it happens. I'm saying that I know what happens.
I'm sure it happens. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
absolutely.
and that comes to people like me, who then I get engineers, and we sit there and we try to reverse engineer the data we've been given to determine, the physical properties of each target. And once we have the physical properties of each target identified, we have to determine the level of destruction necessary to achieve the objective. Whether it's destruction of centrifuge capacity or whatever. Again, I'm just saying that that's what needs to happen. We identify the physical properties of the structure, the level of destruction necessary, and then we match a weapon to that. So each target will have, I've done this, each target has a workup sheet that says, this is the target, this is what needs to happen, this is the weapon. And then there's another one that allows battle damage assessment to say, this is what we're looking for to determine whether or not objectives have been met. So each target has this targeting package put together that then gets turned into a strike package. It gets sent to the operators, who are told, what the location is, the weapon system, how time of flight, if there's any navigation ahead, all that gets programmed in. Boom. So we take out, I don't know, let's say there's 15 targets we need to take out in the nuclear. I'm just throwing out an arbitrary number here. 15 targets. So we've done that. Now we have to take the next step. If we do this, what is Iran's response? And Iran has promised a devastating response. So we then say, what do we need to do to interdict to the extent possible Iran's ability to carry out this response? And so we go back to intelligence, and we know Iran has these underground cities. So we scour the intelligence to look at potential construction to find out where it is. We then, again, build up a model of the facility, what we think is going on inside the facility. We are actively collecting intelligence. Again, Professor Marandi knows this. Intelligence organizations are trying to speak to your engineers, to people who work there, to people who may have been providing construction assistance, and to build up this capability so we have an understanding. And each one of these then is assigned a weapon capable of achieving the objective. Then the next thing is, if we're going to do this, then what is our goal and intention with the government of Iran? I believe that the United States, unless Donald Trump has issued orders to Tulsi Gabbard, and I hope he has, to terminate our regime change plans, the CIA has been working, and Professor Marandi, you know this. You know what happened in the summer of 2023. You know what the CIA did. You know what British intelligence did. They are working with groups to bring down the theocracy, the government of the Islamic Republic. And so we have that. We know, I'll give you an example of the thinking. Desert Fox was the American attack on Iraq in December of 1998. Ostensibly, it was supposed to be a strike to remove Iraq's weapons of mass destruction capability. But a major component of the strikes were the suppression of Iraqi security and an intelligence effort to recruit Iraqi generals who would then, their facility would not be struck. Those soldiers would then march on Baghdad to remove Saddam Hussein. It was a regime change exercise. Everything we do is a regime change exercise. Everything we do. So I believe that if we were to strike Iran, it would become a regime change exercise, which means then we incorporate the targets that are involved with communications, security, government services, and the government itself, a decapitation exercise. This will be complicated by reality. But again, Professor Marandi, I'm not making this up. You know how Haniyeh was killed. And you know what tool was used, a drone that was not launched from outside of Iran, but a drone that was launched from inside Iran. There is capability embedded in Iran that is designed to achieve regime change. Haniyeh was killed on the day of the presidential inauguration. This was one of the most deeply insulting things that Israel has done. It's murder, but it's also meant to be an insult, but it's also meant to be a statement of capability and capacity. I'm not threatening Iran. I'm telling you my thinking. And my thinking is that if I were in charge of this campaign, I would initiate the campaign with drone-level strikes against Iranian leadership to take out as much of the leadership as possible, followed by an immediate attack on Iran's nuclear infrastructure and retaliatory capacity, and then sustained strikes against their communications and their leadership, all the while the CIA and their allies seek to rise the people up against the regime. That's what I mean by nation-ending exercise. This is purely hypothetical on my part, a lot of speculation, but it's based upon the fact that I've done this before against Iraq, and I'm familiar with the thinking that goes into these kinds of strikes. So now people say, oh, you're threatening Iran, you're trying to bully Iran, you're trying to scare Iran. No, you asked me a question. How do you get to that? I just laid it out to you. None of this is meant to be a threat. None of this is meant to be anything other than statements of fact based upon past experience apply to potential future objectives. That's what I meant by nation-ending exercise.
Yeah, and Professor
Yes,
Marandi, I want you to
and
respond to that. Sure.
yeah,
Yes. Yes.
I understand what Scott is saying, and that this is not meant to threaten the Iranians. All I would say for the audience is that the Iranians know American capabilities, and the Iranians have themselves counterintelligence. The Iranians feed the Americans false information. Striking Ismail Haniyeh, regardless of how it was done, was not a difficult thing to do. There were hundreds, if not more than 1,000 guests in Iran, and they were all in different guest houses, and no one was expecting that sort of attack. It was a big mistake on behalf of Iranian intelligence. But remember, the deep state almost killed Trump. So it's not as if this is unique to Iran. Of course, they tried to say Iran was behind it, or Iran was behind an attack to sort of, I think, hide the fact that they're the ones who were trying to kill him. But anyway, because I think your audience should rest assured. If tomorrow Trump is assassinated, I have no doubt the Americans themselves did it. But anyway, you try to blame Iran, but the Americans did it. But Iran's underground cities are vast and extensive. They're unknown. The people who made them, many of them don't know how extensive they are, where they go. They're across the country. And if there's an attack on Iran, their response will come from across the board, and they will immediately destroy everything. And they have hundreds of thousands of drones, and more than 100. Remember that the missiles that struck Israel, no one could stop them. The missiles that would strike targets in the Persian Gulf will get there in minutes, and there are many, and they could, the Israelis couldn't stop them. Stopping them in the Persian Gulf would be impossible. And then, of course, you would have the Americans wiped out in Iraq by the resistance. The regimes in the Persian Gulf would all collapse. I have no doubt if Qatar because Qatar is where CENTCOM is. If there's a fight, then that's the end of Qatar. That's the end of gas. That's the end of oil in the Emirates. That's the end of the billions and trillions of dollars that these regimes produce and waste on buying junk from the West. That's the end of oil production. Yemen would take over Saudi Arabia. All the oil assets in Saudi Arabia would be gone. I don't think the Caucasus would do any better. That would, and then of course, a nuclear attack would have implications in the world that I think would bring an end to many things for the United States. That's a worst case scenario, and Scott is just saying that I think basically what Scott is saying is that the United States, there's such sinister people in the United States that this is a plausible outcome, and Iran has always prepared itself for such madness. But remember, the same engineers who helped the people of Gaza create this defense capability, they're the people who, along with the people of Gaza, created a defense capability where it's almost been 2 years now, and the Israelis, who thought they'd finish this in a couple of weeks, they're still just slaughtering people, and Hamas and Islamic Jihad, their casualties are much lower. They're well protected underground. They come out, they hit, they go back, and the Israelis just kill people. The same is true in Yemen. Those defense capabilities the people of Yemen have created, their heroism in Hezbollah, the same. But in Yemen, the Americans are striking targets that are non-existent. Why? Because Yemen is very good at misinformation, counterintelligence. So it's a complicated game. Well, it's not a game, but it's complicated. War is evil. I fought in war, and I've been to Iraq. I was in the city. I was in Mosul when it was liberated. I was there. I think I took the first person to take footage of the Masjid Jama Nuri, the Nuri Mosque, where Abu Bakr Baghdadi gave his first speech declaring the Islamic State. I took footage of that and I showed it on RT that very day. It was the first time that I was actually a cameraman of sorts. I've been to Syria and I've seen fighting in Syria. I didn't fight, but I've seen fighting in Lebanon. Of course, I was there during the first week or so of the war. I know what war is, and war is horrible. And I do not wish any war in this region to take place. But Iran will, if Iran appeases the United States, it will not end with the nuclear program. It will go on and on and on. And Iran, because of its religious culture, to a large degree, it won't accept humiliation. You know, this famous slogan that we have from this grandson of the Prophet, Hayhat min adillah, it's deeply entrenched in Iranian culture and society. Having said that, Ayatollah Khamenei is one of the smartest people around, highly educated. He speaks 4 languages, and he's a philosopher. He's well read. He's read many English novels. He's a very smart person, very wise, and he, I think, knows exactly what's happening. The Supreme National Security Council, the president, all of them will collectively make the right decision, I'm sure. I may disagree with A, B, or C, but I think the general direction that the country takes will be the right one. Iran, I have no doubt that if the United States is reasonable, there can be an agreement. But that will not have anything to do with Iran's support for Palestine. It will not have no impact on Iran's support for Yemen. Iran will continue to support the resistance. I'm talking about the nuclear program. If it respects Iran's sovereignty, Iran's rights, if the United States is reasonable, there are ways to solve this. But if the United States is unreasonable, then we will have a big problem and Iran will remain steadfast. I think that Scott is hopefully right, that Witkoff will probably come in and say, you have to do this, that, and then the Iranians will say no. And then Witkoff will have to go to plan B. Hopefully, sane people in the United States, they will have the upper hand, but you know, there are Zionists. And Zionists are not sane, they're not humane, and they are dangerous. So again, my final word is that all of us have to focus on the real enemy. And I mean all the viewers. And that is those who are carrying out genocide, those who are pushing the world towards destruction. I go to China a lot. I've been going to China for many years. The nonsense, the nonsense that they say about the people of China is, and I go to Russia quite often. The nonsense that they say about Russia and China is similar to what they say about Iran. China is a very advanced society. I've just been to Guangzhou a couple of weeks ago, and Chengdu as well. Very sophisticated people going out at night, families going out. They are human beings just like everyone else. And when Vance, the U.S. Vice President, calls them peasants and
cringe,
this sort of racism and disgusting racism, it shows that the problem is in the United States, because it's not just Iran, it's not just Russia, it's just everyone, the other. So we have to focus on countering this narrative, and people are waking up. We have to be optimistic. Look at the recent polls about the Israeli regime in the United States. Even the American people, now the majority of them disapprove. And this, I think, is a lot of credit due to those people who are active online in the United States, on the streets, especially young people. And the rest of the world, of course, is far more hostile towards the regime. So I am optimistic about the future, although there is danger ahead, and we must all work together to put pressure on those who are creating danger for the region and the world.
Yeah, well said, gentlemen. Well, if you all want to give a final comment to what I'm about to say, you can. You have a choice. But from, one of the big takeaways from today's conversation, though, definitely, especially toward the end here, is that, we really are as a planet, as humanity, we really are depending a lot on the rationality of emerging powers like Iran, like Russia, like China. I mean, look at what Russia is doing right now with the United States as the Ukraine conflict still continues, and there's the negotiations and the dancing. Iran too has, so for so many years through its rationality, has negotiated with the United States in good faith and met its the commitments. And now we have a situation, a big challenge now, where you have the United States under Trump, yes, but of course this has a long history of Iran being threatened, the aggression toward Iran building up, and as Scott, you alluded to, this very real threat of a catastrophic war. So the big debate that has emerged is, well, what does Iran do? What happens from here? And the big challenge is Iran has its sovereignty to protect, has its interests to protect, its self-determination to protect. And it's just so hard to imagine how much more can Iran give before it becomes capitulation. And now that is, I think, a very dire question. That, yes, Professor Marandi, you're right. Like, the United States, yes, this is the source of the issue. And Scott, you've also said this today too. So if you have any final comments, I want to definitely give you both the opportunity to.
Well, I'll start, and then Professor Marandi can finish it up because he's far more eloquent. What I'll say is this: peace can be the only outcome here, and if you're not working towards a peaceful outcome, you're the problem, not the solution. And I say that to the people that are encouraging Iran to develop a nuclear weapon because they somehow believe they have an insight on what deterrence is. I think the Iranians know what deterrence is, and they've been very successful at straddling the fence, so to speak, to create leverage without crossing the line to where it becomes real. And then Iran has done the right thing in terms of adjusting its position as needed to achieve an outcome that prevents a war. And I have faith in Iran's capacity to do that again. Managing the United States is an impossible task, because we're not just a petulant child, we're a petulant adult that's been on steroids and can kick the hell out of just about anybody who confronts them directly. So how do you bring that under control? You don't confront it directly. You use the art of the indirect approach. And Iran is very effective at that. So is Russia. So is China. And I think at the end of the day, the United States can be managed to avoid doing something precipitous, and we can get an outcome that will be acceptable to everybody. And eventually, even a steroid infused madman will calm down eventually if given the opportunity. And I'd like to believe that we're going to bring closure to this, to Iran's nuclear problem, the problem of Iran's nuclear, programs. But I think that we have the potential now to reach a deal. I don't think this will be a deal as a presidential executive order. I think this will be quantified as a treaty. And I think it will bring closure to this. I think Donald Trump is truly interested in telling Israel, drop the Iran problem. We have no desire to bomb Iran on behalf of Israel, none whatsoever. But we've boxed ourselves into a corner. We've created a problem from our own imagination, and we've boxed ourselves into a corner. And we're too proud and too stupid to admit this. And so Iran has to help us out of this. That doesn't mean capitulation. That means wisdom. That means understanding your opponent and working with others to find an off-ramp. And I think what's happening in Oman is an off-ramp. So I'm optimistic. I believe that we're in the right place right now where we need to be given. It's not an ideal place, but given the whole set of circumstances, where we were a week ago, where we were 2 weeks ago, we're in the right place right now, where we have Iranians and Americans indirectly meeting in Oman to resolve a single issue, which is the nuclear program. And we've created the potential for success. And hopefully Iran continues to show the maturity and wisdom that it has showed leading up here. Trump is sincere in his desire to avoid a war with Iran, and we find the solution. But I just want to thank you, Danny, for enabling this conversation, because it basically, this topic, and especially as it's attached to Professor Marandi and myself, had gone insane on social media and alternative media. And it passed the point of being productive, and it become counterproductive to achieving the goals and objectives that I think Professor Marandi and I want, which is peace. Peace with dignity, peace with respect for sovereignty, but peace. As I said before, for all the people out there, all I ask you to do is love the Iranians more than you hate America. You spend so much time focused on hating America, on kicking America, on belittling America, that you lose sight of what's really important here, which is the Iranian people, the Iranian nation, and doing what's necessary to ensure that because of America's stupidity, Iran doesn't suffer.
Professor Marandi, your final comment, final comment, I guess.
I just want to point out that the Israeli regime has lost over the past year and a half, more than a year and a half. Yes, the resistance has been hurt. Gaza is suffering immensely. Lebanon has been hurt. Yemen is being attacked. Iran is under maximum pressure sanctions. No one else is doing anything. Everyone else has betrayed the Palestinian people. Even those who pretend that they're doing something, they're betraying the Palestinian people. But I mean, these regimes. But Israel has lost. It's lost. It has not been able to gain a foothold. The burden on the regime, economic, military, political burden, is huge. The divide inside the regime is unprecedented. But most importantly, the regime has been delegitimized in the eyes of the world. And the world sees it. China is a good example. As I said, I frequently travel to China. Before October the 7th, most Chinese were indifferent. And I could say that people were divided. Maybe some say, even, let's say, those who followed the issue, some of them even had some more supporters for Israel. There were more supporters for Israel than for the Palestinians, basically because of business and that sort of thing. But now, I think since over the last, I don't know, year and a half or so, I've been to China maybe 4 or 5 times, been to different cities. It's almost universal, the hatred and contempt. The same is true in Russia. I've been to Russia a few times since. And of course, my experience is anecdotal, but when I speak to colleagues, when I speak to people, the mood in Russia has changed. And the same is true everywhere. Even in India, I think it's, as these images come out, a lot of people are saying, well, the world in any case has turned against the regime. And we just have to keep pushing. And if we keep pushing, and if we keep people united across the region, across the world, and expand this global resistance, I'm optimistic. It's not going to end today. It's not going to end next week. It's not going to end next month or next year. But I think the Israeli regime, it's in its dying phases. And on a final note, which is, let's say, a bit more humorous, if anyone has time, although everyone's exhausted if they're listening right now. I'm exhausted. They should go and watch my debate on Piers Morgan. You'll have a good laugh, and you'll see how irrational these pro-Israeli people are, and how Western media is so tightly controlled. You will not have debate anywhere, but when you do have debate, they'll design it in a way so that you can't get your message across, and so that Western narratives are preserved. So we therefore have to, I think your viewers should watch it whenever they have time for a good laugh, but also it just shows that we have to be more active. We have to be more active. It's very tiring for all of us, but imagine what the situation is like in Gaza or in Sana'a and elsewhere. So we have a duty to push hard, to be more active, and there is light at the end of the tunnel. Thank you, Danny, for inviting us.
Oh, of course, of course. No, this was definitely much needed. I really appreciate you two having this exchange. I thought it was incredibly informative, and always this program, the principal purpose is to, regardless of what I do to try to get eyes here in the show, it is to promote and forward a message of peace. And as Scott said, peace with dignity, peace with justice, and to ensure that if we're Americans, we are doing everything we can to make the world a more peaceful place, one where the United States itself, as its hegemon, is feeling pressure to do that, and of course, giving voices to those like Professor Marandi who are treated like this by mainstream media in order to try to promote the opposite purpose of this program. So thank you so much, gentlemen. We will head out of here. Everyone hit the like button before you go. That helps boost the stream and YouTube's algorithm afterwards. Go to the video description. You can find Scott Ritter's new book, which I also gave a blurb to. So be sure to check that out. Highway to Hell, the Armageddon Chronicles, for Clarity Press. You can find Professor Marandi's social media account on X there too, where you can follow all of his commentary and his interviews. And also in the video description, all the places to support this work, Patreon, Substack, and so much more. Without further ado, everybody, have a good rest of your day. Thanks so much, and I will be back again soon. Bye-bye.